Welcome to the Fear and Greed Business Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. Chris Cuffe AO is one of the most well-known figures in Australian investing. Throughout his career, he's held roles including Chief Executive of Colonial First State Investments and Challenger and Chair of UniSuper. But at the same time, he's also had a strong belief in the need for philanthropy. In 2010, Chris founded Australian Philanthropic Services, which is now the leading independent not-for-profit philanthropic service organisation in the country. He also founded Third Link Investment Managers, where 100% of management and performance fees are rebated to charity. That figure has almost reached $22 billion worth of rebates. Chris Cuffe AO, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Thank you.
Why have you become so philanthropic? And perhaps you've always been philanthropic, but this seems to be your big motivation nowadays.
Look, I think I probably always was. I suspect a lot of people are, but they don't always have the time or the means. But I certainly became a little more famous at a point in time than I wanted to be. I'd rather have stayed nice and private, but that wasn't the case. So I thought, well, I might as well use this fame and see if I can do a bit of good with it. So I've done a number of things over the years to try and combine investment with philanthropy. So use my base skills to increase philanthropy in Australia.
It is, and I don't really want to go into history, but you've got good press and bad press at different times in your career, and you're a really well-known fund manager. I have heard you speak before, and you just said at one point, and you kind of were a bit jack of the whole lot because you didn't want a profile, but kind of at one point you thought, actually, if I'm going to have a profile and I'm stuck with it, why don't I use it? Isn't that the story?
Yeah, that's pretty much the story. And the bad press was wrong press. It was misreported, but as time went on, people found out the truth, and I think that's allowed me to open a lot of doors and do a lot of things. So I really have just turned that into a useful profile in helping charities. So the first one of those was, as you mentioned in the intro, Third Link Growth Fund was the fund I put together, an Australian equity fund of funds where I wanted to give investors in the fund, so it was promoted to the public. It's currently about $170 million in size. It's an Australian equities investment that anyone can go into. It's a retail product. And the underlying fund managers I use, because it's a fund of funds, they've all agreed to work for no fee. And up the top of that, my fund charges a fee, but that fee all goes to charity.
Okay, so that $22 million over how many years, and where does the money go to? How do you pick your charities?
Yeah, I've been running the fund for about 16 years. It started small. It's a reasonable size now, so it currently peels off we give away around about $1.7 million a year. I choose the charities based on, sometimes it's a theme. For many years, it's been helping kids who've not had a great lot in life. It might be Indigenous kids, it might be unemployed, it might be kids suffering mental health, but also help other organisations. Grattan Institute has been a favourite, the Ethics Institute, but quite a few. They're all shown on the website. There's a comprehensive website for Third Link Growth Fund, and it shows all the charities supported over the years. They tend to be small to medium-sized charities who really need the funding.
Yeah. Okay. Australian Philanthropic Services then, that came first though. Why did you set that one up? And well, how does it work? I think I know why you set it up, but how does it work?
Yeah, Australian Philanthropic Services actually came slightly after Third Link Growth Fund, but they were similar. But I had a view that there was a particular type of philanthropic vehicle called an ancillary fund, private ancillary fund or public ancillary fund, that people who wanted to give money away could utilise and give money away perhaps more efficiently and effectively. But they were pretty much unknown. It's an unknown piece of law, tax law, and I set up a private ancillary fund myself in 2007, I think it was, and it was a pretty clunky, horrible experience. So I thought, well, I'll set up an organisation that would be a charity itself, but the organisation would focus on helping philanthropists, people with who want to give money away, help the philanthropists set up better structures and perhaps give more away over time. And roll the the clock forward 12 years, 13 years, we now administer these ancillary funds for just on 1,000 clients we have. We look after about $2.3 billion on behalf of those clients, and they give away around $160 million a year and increasing. So the thing's working well. It's working really well. And it's not always, philanthropist sounds like something for the rich. It's not always the rich. Some people have got a lot of money, but others can start these structures with as little as $50,000.
Stay with me, Chris. We'll be back in a minute. I'm speaking to Chris Cuffe AO. I mean, Australia, compared to the US at least, Australia doesn't have that history of philanthropy. At one point, I used to put the BRW Rich List together, and I remember Dick Smith being very upset at the time because he said you should actually have a list of philanthropists. The thing is, most people didn't want to tell us. Most people don't want to say how much money they're giving away. Is that a good or a bad thing? How do we encourage an environment of philanthropy?
Well, I don't know whether it's good or bad. That if you want to talk about it a lot, I think certainly in the US there's a culture of, you talk about which foundations you might support. The US was, a lot of the big charitable foundations of fancy names that have been there for decades and decades and decades. The Ford Foundation, as an example, or the Gates Foundation. These are big things. People like talking about those things in America because they've grown up with it. But I think wealth in Australia is still relatively new. These structures I'm talking about, ancillary funds, they haven't been around that long, and they're a much better way, I believe, to give. And it's really not been well known amongst wealth advisors or the wealthy. So that's part of my rationale to set up Australian Philanthropic Services and get the word out there. I mean, we're from a fairly, we started with nothing. We're now the biggest charitable player in Australia and setting these things up and administering them. And we've really only just got started. So I'm confident the future will see a lot more philanthropy in Australia.
How do you bring some of the stuff that we've been reading about? You said ASX-listed companies, you invest in ASX-listed companies in the first entity. We hear lots about corporate culture. There's some really high-profile examples at the moment running through the media. Without commenting on them specifically, how do you kind of choose your companies? How do you think about stuff like corporate culture, like the renewable energy shift, those kind of mega themes? Sometimes I wonder, do they matter or not? Is it just all about getting the more money you make for charity, the better?
Well, I mentioned that within the fund I run, Third Link Growth Fund again, which is an Australian equity fund, I use underlying investment managers. So I'm not selecting stocks directly myself, but the fund managers I select, which by the way are based on merit and years of me being in this industry and thinking I have some idea of who does a good job, they in turn price all those things. So they take into account things to do with the ESG, governance, the environment, society, governance. They take into account those things when they price a stock, or climate change, so that's just part of the process.
Okay. What would you like to achieve? Do you have a goal in terms of how many philanthropists, how much money, something or other, a goalpost that in 5 or 10 years you could sort of walk away from it and say, hey, this is what we did?
Well, it's an interesting question. With Third Link Growth Fund, to start with, I want to achieve a really great investment for investors. So that is one of the few funds in Australia that's actually beaten the All Ordinaries Index, the big index, over the life of the fund. Hardly any fund managers do that. So I'm giving people a very good investment to begin with. If I can keep giving away a couple of $1 million a year to charities, I will do that for as long as I'm cognitively able, and the underlying fund managers are happy to keep doing it. And I think they are really impressed with it. I mean, it's great to be able to give a couple of $1 million a year. It's like a community that we're all enjoying being part of. For Australian Philanthropic Services, that organisation, my goal there is that these ancillary funds become as popular as for wealth advisors as talking about self-managed super funds or superannuation in general, that it becomes into the very common vernacular to talk about philanthropy as part of a person's financial planning needs. And the third organisation we haven't mentioned, I chair a listed company called Hearts and Minds Investments Limited, listed on the Australian Stock Exchange, ticker HM1, and that gives away 1.5% of its assets a year to medical research in Australia. So we're now giving away very significant amounts of money. I think we're up to about $60 million to medical research. That's fantastic. The common theme with all these things that I'm involved with is there's a fair investment side to each of these activities as well. And that's what I enjoy. I can use a base skill and help society. And hopefully through the things I do, that we become one of the bigger contributors to the charitable world.
Chris, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
Thank you.
That was Chris Cuffe AO, Chairman and Founder of Australian Philanthropic Services and the Founding Director and Portfolio Manager of Third Link Growth Fund. Of course, if you're making investments, always seek your own personal advice. We are not an investment podcast. This is the Fear and Greed Business Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, business news for people who make their own decisions. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.